Hello, and welcome to another episode of PSL on the Mic. I'm Maureen, your host. And before we get started, I wanted to thank everybody who already sent in some topic ideas for us. They're really great. We're going to be working on exploring them over the next couple weeks and present some of them to you here in a future podcast. All the information is in the show notes for the episode. So we're about 5 or 6 weeks now, I think, into the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season, and we've already had 3 named storms, Arlene, Brett, and Cindy. Luckily, they were not any threat to land, which is a very good thing. But we are coming up on the peak in mid-August to about mid-October. So that's what we're talking to you about today. And today we brought in Shane Ratliff. He is the let me get your title right here, Emergency Operations and CRS Manager with our Office of Emergency Management. That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
Shane, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for inviting us to be on today.
Awesome. You're on our the second episode.
Ooh.
So we're super excited
to have you. I've got big shoes to fill. The mayor was here last time.
You sure do. I think you'll do a pretty good job. Before we start, explain a little bit about what you exactly do in the division.
In the Office of Emergency Management, we have we're a 2-person shop right now. We work on any and all types of disasters that could affect the city and its residents. We do a lot of planning, planning for those things, working with various city departments to make sure that they're all prepared for various disasters that could happen, and that they're ready to respond to those as quickly as possible to reduce the amount of pain, I guess, for lack of a better term, to our residents by helping us recover faster.
Now, obviously, you're with us all the time. You don't just work during disasters, fires, hurricanes. What do you do during other parts of the year when we aren't in a disaster mode?
In emergency management, it's very much a collaborative effort with all the other agencies throughout the county and even throughout the region. So, I mean, we're constantly working with such as St. Lucie County Fire District, St. Lucie County Department of Public Safety, sheriffs, police, all the different agencies that would come together. We work with them throughout the year to help refine processes, procedures, plans for how we're all going to be able to come together when it's go time.
When there is a disaster.
When there is a disaster, we want to make sure we do training, we do exercises. We just had our annual hurricane exercise last week, and those kind of things help us identify those gaps or those areas where we can improve so that when the real thing happens, that's not an issue anymore because we've already fixed the problem.
Now, I don't want to say you're in a lull right now because you're never really in a lull, but the peak of the season, I had stated earlier, was about, mid-August to mid-October. So we had the Hurricane Expo a couple back in June, early June. Now, there were a lot of people there. It seemed like it was a pretty big success.
Yeah, according to our counters, we had over 2,600 people come to the expo this year.
Is that the most ever?
I'm not sure because I've only been with the city for a couple of years. I'm not sure how many they had, in 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
But I know it's the most that we've had since the pandemic, and it beat what we had the year before the pandemic. So next year we're already in discussions and planning for next year's expo with the event center, and instead of just doing half of the event center, we're actually going to use the entire event center next year for the expo because it's growing so quickly. Last year was only 2,000. This year 2,600. So it's going to
be
keep
over
growing.
3 next year, probably, maybe even higher. We are going to put in the show notes. We have information, cityofpsl.com/hurricane. All of the presentations were filmed that day. So if you couldn't go to the expo, you can watch everything there.
That is correct.
Yeah, you guys did a great job. It was an awesome time. So before we get into what residents can do to prepare, I want to go over a little bit of the 2023 hurricane outlook because I think it changed.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
So the 2 big ones that everyone follows is Dr. Klausbaugh out of Colorado State University. He's usually the first one to release around March of every year what that season's outlook's going to be. And so what they do in their outlooks, they take all the data from the past year. They take where the trends are going towards. Like this year, the trend was going toward we were going to be in an El Nino by summer, and sure enough, last month the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said, "Yep, we're in an El Nino now." So they take all that data, put it together, and they come up with what they compare it against the average year, so which is like the 150-year average for number of hurricanes, number of major hurricanes, and number of landfalling hurricanes.
Okay.
So Dr. Clausbaugh first came out around March, 1st of April, and it showed that it was going to be a slightly, and when I say slightly, I mean like one-off, slightly lower than average hurricane season was what the prediction was. And so then about end of May, the National Weather Service, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration put out their outlook, which is the official outlook. They said the same thing. Pretty much it was going to be slightly below the average for the 150-year period that they put into effect. And then just last week, Dr. Clausbaugh, which he normally doesn't do an update until the first week of August, about mid-season is when he does his update. He put an update out last week, and now he's saying because of all the data showing how much warmer the Atlantic waters are than they normally are because of the El Nino, which is set in and fully in force right now, that it was going to be slightly above average. So if that average is like 12 named storms, he had said 11, now he's saying 13. So it's just slightly above the average.
Now, when you say we're in an El Nino, what does that mean exactly?
El Nino is a term. You have El Nino and La Nina. Correct. And for the past 7 years, since 2014 was the last time we were in an El Nino year. So the last 7 years have been La Nina years or neutral years, what they call neutral years. And that's based on ENSO, ENSO, and I don't even know what it stands for.
It
has to do with surface oscillation as far as the wind patterns. And so if you look at the west coast of South America, like off the coast of Peru, and they take and find out what are the water temperatures doing there, because what the water temperatures are doing there affects the winds that go across the Caribbean going east. And we all know that for the most part, most of the hurricanes come from the coast of Africa, especially during, they call it the main development region, especially during the peak of hurricane season.
Right.
And so if the winds are blowing, the upper level winds are blowing harder to the east, as across the Caribbean, as these things are coming west, it creates wind shear. And so you've got west, you've got east, it shears. The shear keeps the storms from either forming, keeps them from being as strong as they could have been, or completely tears them up. And so we saw that with Arlene, Brett, and Cindy, particularly Arlene and Brett. They came through, they went through right through the main development region into the Caribbean. As soon as they crossed the Leeward Islands into the Caribbean, boom, they were gone.
They were shredded. Okay.
Yeah, they were shredded because of those upper level winds caused by the El Nino, which oddly enough comes from warm waters off the coast of western South America.
God, it's so involved. I'm such a weather nerd though, so I'm kind of really interested in this. Now, El Nino was supposed to suppress storms? Is that the idea? Or maybe not suppress, but like tear them up, like you said?
Exactly. It causes that upper level wind shear. And I mean, if you look, most things that, or the thing that most people could relate it to is like a tornado. You know how a tornado is like a funnel and it goes up and it gets really big at the top. Well, all the energy is at the top of it, and then it funnels it down to a pinpoint on the ground. Hurricanes are very, very similar to that, except they're much wider. Sure. So your eye of your hurricane might be 25 miles wide, whereas the pinpoint on a tornado might be a half a mile wide.
Okay.
So think of it as, because all that energy is at the top, causing that bottom to do what it's doing. If there's wind shear cutting the top of it off, then it can't create its cycle. Pull stuff up and then spit it out. It can't do that anymore.
I get it.
That tears up the storm so that it can't intensify.
Now, what about this Saharan dust I'm hearing about? Does that have any effect on storms or nothing?
Actually, Saharan dust it stops rainfall. So, I mean, if you notice, probably in the last week, we had a lot of rain, like a couple of weeks before. I mean, our typical wet season cycle, and then some Saharan dust started coming over, and you notice, I mean, that's hot the whole time, so it doesn't affect how hot it's going to be. Unfortunately, in South Florida, it doesn't affect how hot it's going to be, but it does affect rain and storm formation. So the less moisture there is in the air, then the less thunderstorm probabilities there are, and then that also, when that's out in the ocean, like right now, if you go and look at a Saharan dust model, all the way from here to almost Africa is just densely covered in that dust. And so with that dust there, the storms have a hard time forming because it's dry.
Right.
They have to have heat and moisture.
Yep, moisture.
And this takes away one of those two. It takes away the moisture. So without the moisture, it can't form.
Okay. Now let's get into the nitty gritty about how people can safely prepare their homes, make sure their family is okay. I know there's 4 things that emergency management likes to focus on when residents are preparing.
Absolutely.
Let's go over them.
Yeah, and so the first one, obviously, we want everyone to know where they live, whether it's a place they would ever have to evacuate. So we use the term know your zone. You need to know, are you in an evacuation zone? Or you need to know, are you in a flood zone, which is completely different from an evacuation zone. We have the tools. Our GIS department here at the city has been really good about they take all this data and all these zones, put them together and put it into a thing. You type your address in and it'll tell you straight up you're in an X flood zone or you're in evacuation zone A. And that way, when you hear the public officials say, evacuation zone A needs to evacuate, then you know right then I'm in zone A. It's time to put my plan into place. And we'll talk a little bit about the plan here in a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone should go the web address that you gave, www.cityofpsl.com/hurricane. That you can go there and there's a Know Your Zone locator link. You click on that, it takes you to the city's GIS department where they've got all that plugged in. All you got to do is type in your address.
That's perfect. And don't worry, guys, we're putting that in the show notes. So
absolutely. And so first you have to know your zone. So evacuation zones, just to go full circle with this, a lot of people wonder, how are these evacuation zones chosen? How did they pick this street but not this street? And it's all based, for hurricanes, evacuation zones are based completely on storm surge modeling, because as we saw with Hurricane Ian last year over on the Southwest Florida on the West Coast, most of the fatalities had nothing to do with wind damage. It wasn't they were blown away.
They very rarely do.
They drown because of the storm surge. You have 15, 16 feet of storm surge. And just real quick for the listeners, storm surge does not mean the tide will be 15 feet higher up on the beach. It means that there's a 15-foot wall of water coming in with this storm, and it's pushing that out ahead of the storm. So if your home's not 15 feet high, then it's completely covered, and that's what they base these on. So for St. Lucie County and Port St. Lucie in particular, how it affects us is we have this river running right up through the middle of our town. Well, a little bit to the east, but we have this river running up right through the middle of town. And if you remember back in Hurricanes Wilma, Jean, and Francis, 2 of those came right up the river, the eye of the storm, and that's what produces storm surge. Now, you're going to get a little bit of surge all the time if it's coming up on the East Coast. We had 6 foot of surge with Nicole. Nicole was a really small storm in November.
And that was a West Coast. Was that a West Coast?
No,
that was East Coast.
But
that was the one that was hit Vero.
It didn't make landfall till it got to Vero Beach, but it was pushing enough water that it pushed 6 foot higher than normal water up the river. And those of you who have been down to our boardwalk can see where we have roped off, where it damaged the boardwalk, because the boardwalk was like, I think, 4 foot above the water level, and it went 2 foot above the boardwalk. So we were watching it on video live as the boardwalk was getting covered, and we're like, look at the storm surge, and this is such a small storm. Yep. It was a Category 1, for goodness sake. And then it dropped right back down to just a strong tropical storm. Yep. Imagine what a Category 5 would do if it took the same kind of path. So those of you who live along the river, you really need to pay attention. You really need to know what your zone is. And when that order is given to evacuate, you really should heed that order, because we don't want the same thing to happen here as what happened in so many other places where people, I've got a strong home. It doesn't matter how strong your home is if it's covered in water.
That people focus, I think, more on the wind aspect of a hurricane, because that's really how they predict them, from, Cat 1, Cat 2, but it's all based on the winds, but they have to remember about the storm surge.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the intensity of the storm is always based on the wind, because it's the wind scale. But that wind is what's driving that water. Yep. So you got to remember, it's not just the wind in the air; it's the water that the wind's pushing along in front of it, or that's coming in behind it, depending on which angle it's coming in from. We have storm surge all the time. Whenever these storms come by, if you remember Irma back in 2017, remember Tampa Bay. everybody was like, oh, you could
Yep.
walk across Tampa Bay because it pulled all the water out. Well, that was because it was pushing it all up into a big wall up into the air. Luckily, it didn't hit Tampa, Irma didn't hit Tampa Bay. So the water eventually just, came back up slowly the way it normally would. But if it had come right up Tampa Bay, it would have been a huge wall of water, and it would have, went right into the middle of the city.
Yeah. So folks, know your zone.
Yes, absolutely. Know your zone.
What's the second thing we have to look for
The
here?
second one is make a plan. Like I mentioned a second ago, you need to have a plan for you and everyone in your household. You need to know, where am I going to go? If the evacuation order comes and my zone is an evacuation zone, where am I going to go? You don't have to go to Ohio. You don't have to go to New York. We go get out in the community and talk to people, and I've heard so many people say, "Well, I'm just going to pack my stuff and head to New York, or because that's where I'm from." And I'm like, well, first of all, you'll be lucky if you get there because the traffic.
Yeah.
And the reason
and many
why,
people don't have the means to do that either.
Yeah. And the reason why the traffic's so bad is because people are trying to go too far.
Right.
The whole idea is go tens of miles, not hundreds of miles. If you can go 10 miles inland from the shore, you'll be fine. So, if you live on the east side of town and you've got friends that live in Tradition, pack up your stuff, call your buddy over in Tradition, go and stay at their house until the storm passes. Then go back, home and hopefully, everything's okay.
Yeah.
But if not, it just keeps your family safe. So make sure you have a plan of what you're going to do. And then that bridges into building a kit, which is number 3. You need to have a kit, especially for those of you who don't live in evacuation zones, have nice sturdy homes, or nowhere near water. You don't have to worry about any of that. Well, guess what? The power is going to be out for a long time. We've seen this happen time and time again where, power will be off 3, 4, 5 days.
Or weeks. Francis and Jean were weeks.
Oh, yeah, Francis and Jean. It's improved so much since back then. But still, 3, 4, 5 days without power, you got to eat. You have to have water to drink. You're not going to have it in the refrigerator. The refrigerator's going to, you're not going to want to eat the stuff that's in there. So you need to have a kit built with all these dry goods, whether it be canned goods or straight up dry goods, cases of water, and for 7 days, enough for 7 days. So the rule of thumb for water for an individual is 1 gallon a day for 7 days. So 7 gallons of water to have sitting for each person in the house. So don't look at it as like this big task, because most of us and a lot of us, drink bottled water anyway.
Sure.
So if you have, 5 or 6 cases of bottled water that sitting in a corner or something like that, or in your pantry, or even in your garage, that's what I do at my house. Is I just normally always have 2 cases, of water. But when it gets hurricane season, I'll go and buy 4 more. So now I've got 6. There's 2 of us in the house. 6 cases of bottled water will do us way more than a week.
And if folks haven't done this yet, they obviously still have time, but we try to encourage them to do it, add things to that kit, like maybe during the year. Of course, money is very tight right now, where it's tough for everyone. So if they just slowly add things to that kit, that works too. But again, we're not in a storm situation right now, so they can go out and buy all these things that they need for their kit. Besides food, what else should be in that kit?
A lot of people forget about their medications. A lot of people take medication that's life sustaining. If you don't take your blood pressure medication for 4 or 5 days, and if you've ever been in your home and sat through a hurricane, it's the most nerve-wracking thing in the world.
Very stressful.
I've heard so many people that have done it said, I will never do it again. I will never stay in my house. I don't care how little it is. I'm leaving because it scared me to death. That howling for 20 hours. And the noises that are happening outside scary to death. So medication, you got to make sure that you have that supply, 7 to 14 days worth of medication, because again, if the power's off, we don't know how quickly Walgreens, CVS, all your pharmacies are going to reopen.
Right. It's not just your home. It's businesses that aren't going to have power.
Exactly. You're not going to be able to just run out to Publix as soon as the storm passes after a Category 4, because they're not going to be open, because they're going to have their own damages just like you have damages, and those damages have to be repaired, and the power has to be back on in order for them to be able to allow you to purchase stuff.
Now, what about batteries? Are always good. Candles, there's safety candles, flashlights, maybe a weather radio.
Absolutely. Weather radio, and a lot of people say, that's an old-timey thing. Weather radio, even today, is still probably your best method, tried, true, and tested method of getting notification of something going on, because as long as you've got the batteries in it, even if the power goes off, it still works.
Where are they available?
You can get them. You'd be really surprised. I saw them at Publix just the other day.
Oh, okay. So Publix, Home Depot, maybe?
When season starts, hurricane season starts, a lot of your big box stores, even if they're normally grocery stores, that's one thing they'll put out to sale. But yes, Home Depot, Lowe's, any of your big box store, Walmart, they all have available to get hurricane or weather radios. You can also go to Amazon and buy them all day long and have them shipped right to your house if you don't want to go out and get one.
Okay, good. Now, one more thing about the kits. My kit is in my garage. However, I don't think I've updated it or like restocked it in a while. Is there a time frame that people should be looking for that? I mean, it's if they're non-perishables, they're okay, but like as far as batteries and stuff like that.
Yeah. One thing that I do so that I always have something that's less than a year old, sitting out there is I incorporate it into the normal, for lack of a better term, rotating stock of what I've got in the house. So like, I mean, if I like to eat green beans, I'm going to keep green beans out there. Well, guess what? Once November 30th comes and hurricane season's over, I'm going to take the green beans that are in the garage and put them in next time I have green beans for a meal. And then when I buy my replacement, I'll put it back in the garage. So
perfect. That's
if you
a good
just
way.
rotate it through and do the same thing with the water, just rotate it through and always replace it back into your stock for your kit.
Okay, that's great. And there's one more thing that you guys want to make sure that we all know about.
Yep, and this one your department helps us a lot with is stay informed. You got to know when to go, right? You got to know when to pack your stuff and leave, or you got to know when it's coming. So there's multiple ways that you can do that here in the city of Port St. Lucie. First and foremost, the official alert system is through St. Lucie County. It's called Alert St. Lucie. And so anyone can go to, stlucieco.gov/alert, and it will redirect you to another site for a third-party vendor. So don't get freaked out when it says it's redirecting you, because that's what it'll do.
Thanks for that information.
Yes, because a lot of people say, but I went there and it's not the county site. Well, it takes you to the county site, but it immediately says, we're redirecting you, and it's this really long address. But it's a lot easier for me to say stlucieco.gov/alert, and the listeners will remember it. They're not going to remember that 27 number string that's on the end of the real address.
Right.
So it takes them there. And they sign up. You get to choose what you want. That's the best part. I had it when I was in Palm Beach County, when I used to live down there. Now I'm up here. I have it here. You get to choose what you want. So under weather, for example, the weather category, you can choose severe thunderstorm watch. You can choose severe thunderstorm warning. So all the watches and warnings for the various weather events, you can choose which ones you want to come to you. So if you're like we are, weather nerds, and you want to know about everything, you're going to check all of them. But if you're one that's like, I just want to know when the hurricane's coming, then, check hurricane watch, hurricane warning. You're not going to get anything about severe thunderstorms or anything like that. So it's not going to, overburden you.
Right. And inundate you with text messages you might not want.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is you get to choose how it's delivered to you. So it will call you on the phone and tell you, of an automated system. It will text you if you want it to text you, or it will send an email to your email address, or it'll do all three. I put all three in, and once you acknowledge it, when the first one comes, if you acknowledge it, it won't send the other two. But if you don't acknowledge it, you get all three of them.
I am so happy that you said that, because I get all three. But I listen to the message, but I never acknowledge at the end. So that's probably why I get the text and the email. I didn't realize. Look, I learned something today that I didn't even know. That's great. That's a good thing to know about. So perfect. Now, we got furry friends living in the house too. They're part of our family. Is there anything specific that we can do for our animals?
Yes. Again, if you go to our webpage, and when we're talking about building a kit or making a plan, you will see on both of those, it says, don't forget about your pets, and it'll give you specific pet lists of things you should pack for your pets. Some people's pets take medication. I have a diabetic cat, for example. So, I mean, I have to give him insulin shots.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's the kind of thing you want to, make sure you don't forget those types of things, because if the pet's going with you to wherever you're going, they need to eat too. They need their medication too. They need water as well. So, you can go to our webpage and get checklists for your pets and for your family, as well as links that will take you to FEMA's website has a plan template. And so basically all you got to do is just type in the information. It asks you the question, you type it in, and when you get to the end, you hit like submit or whatever, and it creates a PDF file with a plan that takes all that information and incorporates into it as well. So
what a great idea. What a great idea. And as far as shelters, I know that the county is in charge of the shelters, but we can share information about
exactly.
that too.
According to Florida statute, each county emergency management agency is responsible for making sure that they have shelters available for those that need to evacuate and go to a shelter. We work with the St. Lucie County Emergency Management. We have, for example, the special needs shelter. The primary special needs shelter is in Fort Pierce at the Finn Center. We have a memorandum of understanding in place with the county. If that one were to ever go over capacity, we have facilities in the city that we can open up as a secondary shelter to make sure that those people have a place to go. But yes, you can go to their webpage, which is stlucieco.gov/EOC, and you can register for your special needs shelter if you're someone with special needs that's dependent upon some kind of electric device, such as oxygen or CPAP or something like that, something that requires electricity. That way they can make sure they get you into the special needs shelter program, where there's always going to be electricity because it's got the backup generators. They have nursing staff there from the Department of Health that helps you with those minor things. But that's not for people that need to be in the hospital. It's just for people that live day to day, but they're electricity dependent in order to keep them going. Okay.
Now, after the storm, all this is fantastic information. We'll share links in the show notes about all of this. After the storm passes, what does emergency management do in that situation after the storm is over?
So we activate before the storm even strikes. We activate our EOC.
Let's flip back for a second. Yeah. Let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people are probably interested in that. What exactly happens when we're activated, as the city or the county is activated before a storm? Let's go over that first.
So as we know, we usually have some pretty good lead time on hurricanes coming, right?
Thank goodness,
5, 6, 7, 10 days, we'll see them coming. Each department in the city, we all have hurricane preparedness manuals for each department, and they have checklists starting 5 days out, 120 hours prior to landfall, of these things that they're going to do to prepare their department, their people, their equipment. They don't want to leave the equipment outside to blow away. So all of that stuff is contained within each checklist. And so they do that until the point where we activate. Then when we activate the EOC, when the city manager, who is our incident commander under the incident command system, when he does the declaration of a state of emergency, we activate the emergency operations center. And then we have people that are trained and have been exercised. Like I said, we had that exercise just last week, that come together to our emergency operations center, which is located in one of our city buildings. And we're in that room coordinating all of those functions that the city continues, with the departments. So if the departments are still out, they're just coordinating all this stuff through the EOC. And the reason why we have to coordinate through the EOC is so that once it's said and done, we can deliver a package more or less to FEMA saying, here's what we've done, here's how much money we spent doing it, and requesting reimbursement back from FEMA. So just like people get funding from FEMA, if their home is damaged or whatever, they apply for funding. Governments also apply to FEMA for funding to reimburse them for all the dollars they spent preparing and responding and recovering from those same things. So like if we were to have something bad like a bridge, get severely damaged and they have to tear the bridge down and rebuild it, that because of a storm, that's something that we would apply to FEMA, the funding to replace that bridge. And it's a 75-25 split. So, we always have to pay like 25%, but the federal government will cover 75% of that for us.
That's great. Now, after the storm,
recovery. So we've been very lucky since all the way back to Francis, Wilma and Jean, we've been very lucky that recovery has been minimal. It's usually vegetative waste, right? All the palm fronds. The palms are beautiful to look at in Florida, but man, they are such a mess. So basically, we have to make sure the roads have been cleared and are back opened up. Traffic signals, another big problem. Traffic signals, the wiring breaks. And because those things are heavy and they're swinging for hours
and don't they take them down if there's possible winds over 40 miles an hour?
Yes, they take a lot. The older types, they take a lot of those down. A lot of the newer ones are very lightweight, just like your television. Used to take one person pick up a 32-inch television and carry it around. It would have broken their back. Now you can carry it with one hand because they weigh so much less with all the new technology that we have available to us. But yeah, so recovery, the EOC will transition into like a recovery center.
Okay.
And we work with FEMA to open DRCs, is what FEMA calls them, disaster recovery centers in the community, so that people can go and all the city services, county services, state services come together at these DRCs so that it's kind of a one-stop shop for residents to come to get all their needs met. Any of the unmet needs. I said it backward. Unmet needs to get those addressed. They come to the DRC. They can sign up for what's it called? What's the new name for food stamps? It always slips my mind. SNAP.
Oh, right. Okay.
They have a program called DSNAP, which is disaster.
Oh,
SNAP.
Okay.
You can sign up for that there. You can get, they give like debit cards sometimes that have preloaded certain amounts of money. Like if you lost all your food in your refrigerator and you need to be able to go out and buy food. Now, mind you, this is all several days past.
Of course.
It doesn't happen immediately. We have to identify the site. We have to make sure everything's cleared out of the site so that FEMA and the state and the county, all these organizations can come together in there, set up, and then we start running our citizens through it. Prior to that, like for immediate needs, we would work through FEMA, the state, county again, to open like what we call pods, points of distribution. If it's been 3, 4, 5 days and the power's still not back on, we know people are going to start running out of that, running out of those essentials like food and water in particular. So we would, strategically place around the city, points of distribution. We would, advertise it heavily through you guys, through PIO, put that information out there that between this time and this time, you can come and get, a case of water and, a basket full of food or whatever, however it comes packaged to us from the provider. And so we would be able to do stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff on the recovery side that people here, especially as big as we've grown since Francis, Wilma, and Jean, have never seen before. So I just want to reassure everybody that that's another thing that we do year round. We're thinking about these things. How do we pull those triggers? How do we accomplish that mission, and who do we need to work with in order to make sure it's ready to go should we need it at a moment's notice?
And there's you hit the nail right on the head. We have so many new residents here that maybe never went through a hurricane or any sort of tropical system in their entire life. So that's why it was so important for us to have this episode now, because we are growing so much. So you've provided us with tons and tons of information. I remember those pods after Hurricane Michael, the one that hit the Panhandle. I was up there covering it for the newspaper, and they were everywhere. And it makes you feel really good to just see everybody working together during a time when everybody needs to be working together and everybody's kind and helping each other out. So hopefully that will not happen here, that we need to set up these pods. But Absolutely. I know that the city and the county and all of our partners are here for the residents. And we just want to make sure that everybody is safe. So do you have anything else you want to add, Shane? We covered a lot of information.
Just wanted to cover real quickly, there are other disasters other than hurricanes that we should be prepared for. We talked a little bit about flooding, and flooding's not just from storm surge. Flooding it comes from the air, obviously. Florida is a very flat state. There are not very many hills, and if there are, they're probably dumps.
A bridge,
or a trash dump that was closed several years ago. Oh, what's that mountain? No, there's no mountains in Florida. So the water has to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes down, it's going to go to point of least resistance. I mean, you take water and pour it on the table, whichever way the table is leaning, that's the way the water's going. The rain does the same thing. I mean, you look at Hurricane Harvey that hit back in 2017. That's kind
in
of
Houston.
For us. That's kind of the forgotten storm because it hit really close to when Irma hit us. So we were thinking about Irma. They got over 60 inches of rain in Houston in like 3 days. What if we had 60 inches of rain here? Where's it going to go? I mean, eventually it has to get to the ocean, but the canals can't hold 60 inches of rain. So we would have, just like they had, we would have a giant flooding event. And all these places, that's why we always say that all of Florida is a flood zone because it's flat.
Mm-hmm.
If we have something like that, I mean, we're going to have flooding everywhere. We're going to have flooding in all those X zones. Everybody says, I'm in an X zone. I don't have to worry about flooding. Yes, you do. If we get enough rain and we see with what's going on with the climate, I mean, the disasters are worse. The rains are heavier. And they're falling in less time. Just this week, New York had a 1,000-year rainstorm.
Yeah, I saw that.
A 1,000-year event that happens once in a millennia. You know how many times that's happened this year around the country? 3 or 4, I think, have had 1,000-year flooding events.
Mm-hmm.
So things are changing, and we have to be prepared for it. So flooding, that's another one. If you don't have flood insurance, take a look at it. It's, compared to homeowners insurance, it's relatively cheap unless you live on the islands. If you live in a place that's
susceptible to it,
really high chance of flooding, it's going to cost you more. But you live in areas that aren't susceptible to flooding. It's a pretty good add-on to have, and it will cover up to, I think you can get it up to $350,000 now for the home or contents. So it's just, and your homeowner's insurance gives you nothing if you flood, zero. So wildfires, that's another thing. On the far east side of the county, the city over towards the savannas, and the far west side over in the Tradition area. Those were forests, or savannas are still there, but those were forests before. And when you get past the line of where they're developing out west, it's still forest.
Yeah.
And we get dry enough during our dry season that we had 1999, we had huge wildfires in the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things got burned because of them. And so that's something you want to keep an eye on and we have this information again on our webpage, things you can do around your home to kind of better protect your home if if you're right up against that zone, ways to protect your home. Don't plant trees right up against your house, because if the tree's in the forest and the sparks are going over, it's going to catch that tree, which then is going to catch your house on fire. And then finally, the last one is this is the elephant in the room. We all know that over on Hutchinson Island, there's a nuclear power plant. It's been there since 1977. They've had 0 incidents that have required evacuation. So I'll be the first one to say that nuclear is one of the safest forms of energy production there is in the world. Everybody gets caught up like Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island and those Fukushima, which happened because of a storm surge. Oddly enough, is what caused Fukushima to have its problem. But it's the safest form of energy energy production that we have available to us right now. Those plants run like clockwork. FPL has a site. If you go to our webpage, there's a link there under other disasters, and it's a link that takes you to FPL's page, and they kind of give you they give you that information that I'm telling you right now about how safe it is, but then they also say, in the unlikely event, because it's very unlikely to happen, but in the unlikely event that something were to happen, here's what you do.
Perfect.
And then all the residents that live within the 10-mile radius, they call that the emergency planning zone, the EPZ. So if you live within a 10-mile radius of the plant, every year they send you something in the mail that kind of reinforces, here's the things you've got to think about. But don't worry, we're still doing okay. We don't have any problems at the plant. So those are the other big 3 disasters that we, plan for and think about a lot here.
And I'm sure that a lot of the residents hear those sirens too. They periodically do testing for them. We share them on social media just so people are aware that it's a test, and they say that it's a test. So that's really important.
And then you would also get those alerts through, if it were to be a real one, through the emergency alert system, the EAS, so that comes to every phone. Kind of like, remember back in February, everybody got woke up at 4:45 in the morning.
Remember.
Everybody remember that. That was not Alert St. Lucie. I want to be very clear that was not Alert St. Lucie. That was actually the national system, and it was Florida's link into that national system. Someone made a mistake and didn't. They thought they had it on the test side because they have to test it monthly, just like you see the crawler on your TV every month that says this is a test. They thought they were doing that. They were on the live side.
Oops.
So it hit every phone in Florida.
Right.
That was not Alert St. Lucie. I'll say that again.
Emphasize that again.
Emphasize that again. But yes, if it were to be something like that, the emergency alert system would be activated, and you would get those on your phone, whether you've signed up, for Alert St. Lucie or not. But it would also go out again over Alert St. Lucie, because we want to make sure everybody knows in any kind of disaster situation. We want to make sure everybody has the information so that they're staying informed.
Awesome. So everyone, I know we threw a ton of information at you today. That's kind of what we wanted to do, but don't worry. We're going to have all of these links in the show notes. I will list as many links as I can that we chatted about today. Shane, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you guys are busy.
Absolutely.
But this was really important, and we're happy to have you here for our second episode.
Once again, thank you so much for having us here, and to all of our residents. If there's anything we can do to help you guys out, or if you have a community group or an HOA that you'd like for us to come and speak to you, just reach out to us. The information's on our webpage. Reach out to us, and we'll gladly set it up.
Awesome. Shane, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to remind everybody, make sure that you're following us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And there's a little bell on Spotify. Not sure about Apple Podcasts, but there's a little bell where you can get notifications that will alert you when we drop another episode. So make sure that you're doing that so you're not missing anything. You can also watch us on YouTube, which I'm sure everyone is so proud of. Hi, everyone. Talked about the set during the last episode with the mayor. So if you just don't want to not just listen to us, you can watch us. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. All that stuff will be available to you in the show notes. And again, don't forget, if you have an idea that you want to share with us that you maybe want us to talk about on another episode, you can visit cityofpsl.com/podcast and leave us a note. We got several already that are really great. Some that we might bring EM back for. So yeah, we are so happy that you're listening. Shane, again, thank you so much for coming out today, and we'll see you next time.